Hello, everyone, and welcome to this discussion session. My name is Muhammad Saleem. I am an independent researcher here in Enschede, the Netherlands. I graduated for the master's degree in spatial engineering from Faculty of Geoinformation Science and Earth Observation (ITC) in the Netherlands as well. So I have a research foundation that is called OpenGI Science Research Lab, where I do research based on OpenStreetMap data analysis and how the data has been produced in our OpenStreetMap, and several other factors that includes critical geodata studies and also geoethics. So today I'm going to present an idea that I've been working on and that does and also the sub ideas that is connected to a bigger picture that is OpenStreetMap Utopia. And this is basically the idea is basically how we can make OpenStreetMap more usable than it already is, and more oriented towards critical geodata studies, and also more oriented towards geoethics and more on data justice aspects as well. Few of the data justice aspects, not all of them, because data justice aspects are quite huge, and also the other concepts are the previous concept that I mentioned are also very huge. First, we all know that the representation of our world is very complex, and what we do is try to make it more simplified and make it a bit more abstract. And this data, the abstract data, we build systems on that abstract data, and this abstraction and gets really obvious when we are using the heterogeneous sources of data. And when we are using the heterogeneous data, the systems are more complex. But then what the researchers usually do, like me, is try to make it the abstraction of that data and then present it for different models. But we miss out several details that are inside of it. There are contexts and different complexities that we miss from the data, and that is some of the reason that OpenStreetMap is not completely used for everything that we do in our researches. And but but in OpenStreetMap we join our forces to build the data together and to make it available for everything and for all of the world. But still the data is still missing. But when the data is available in an OpenStreetMap, and we use it for different purposes. But the real world features are always changing, and we don't see that as a part of a complexity. As at many times we don't see it. Why? I will discuss that a bit later on, that how I found out that we are going to lose that detail, that the real world features are always changing, and how it is, I will explain a little bit later in the presentation. So next is that how can we make it seamless? Like most purpose readiness is checked either on the field or comparing it with high quality external sources. In Global South, this data is not available. Seamless means here is that how we can make sure the data that we are currently using is up to date, and it's available, and it's ready to use for a certain purpose and application. The concept that is under definition, that is to try to create an imaginary that would closely depict the real world representation of the place, but in OpenStreetMap. Well, this also means that there is some medium to compare it with. So basically what I mean when I say Openstack Utopia is that a land or a place, the representation of a place that represent exactly as the real life features. But what mechanisms do we use to actually make it so? So Well, there are several means to see whether what we have there is Utopia or SAM or not. The goal is to look at those mediums and to explore whether we can create these mediums that help us to qualify if a certain area can be considered as Utopia. So it's much more complex. First of all, it's much more complex than just simply saying that this map has the features of the real world. This map has a feature representation of the real world. This is a very much more complex matter than we assumed or we deemed to deliberate. But first, we will discuss those mediums that are currently in place by several researchers and compare and to get the results. And the other part is dystopia that I will not discuss it for now, and it's because it's already 20 minutes of presentation. There are measures used in geodata and OSM in general. This has been concluded by me as a researcher in my MSc and my continuous research. After looking at various researches, work with OSM data quality, we many researchers use these concepts that is on the screen right now, but they're mainly extrinsic and they're also intrinsic as well, internally or externally. There are different definitions of extrinsic and intrinsic. I cannot even pronounce it right, sorry. But first, let's take a step back and let me explain what does the quality means. It means that degree of closeness to the real world, and this degree of closeness to the real world, like the representation is close to the real world features. But this is the definitions of only with the geodata or OSM, because quality is very broad. Quality definitions are very broad, and I'm only defining it for OpenStreetMap. And there are some of the measures, these are some of the measures or mediums that are being used to actually compare the data in OSM with some external data sources such as cadastral data or any other governmental or authoritative sources. Next slide is coming for that. Many researchers have used some intrinsic measures such as comparing and using attribute and checking the stillness of the data in OSM, or mappers experience as a measure of quality. So let's move on, but I'm not going to go into detail into these measures. It's very generic, and these definitions can be found easily. So intrinsic and extrinsic measures, are being used by several researchers, including me, the mapper's experience, date of edit, frequency of edits. There's also measures like attribute accuracy, that is also intrinsic, that does not require the external sources to check whether the quality is enough. But these measures is subjective, because how can we make sure that date of edit makes sense for a certain area, or frequency of edit makes sense for a certain area? Maybe if we know how often it has been updated, maybe we know something about, if you already know something about that cadastral updates, especially in the Netherlands, then we know for sure that the date of edit matters. But in Global South, it's very subjective, that how we can know that at this certain time it's accurate or not, how we can delineate it. And extrinsic measures, as I explained, is very external resources, but some of the data it's actually now available for Global South. For instance, the population data. Disaster Ninja has been doing great work with using population data for the whole world and telling that this area is of less quality and other areas of good quality. But in any way, in any sense, other authoritative and governmental data is still missing in the Global South, and then OpenStreetMap came for its use, and it has been used. But if we see some of the data that is very common in OpenStreetMap, that find areas like this area is San Pedro in Dominican Republic, I think, and maybe I could be wrong about the country, but cities there. It's in the Caribbean. There are a lot of data that is missing. There are almost no building footprints there. So what happens if there is a flood? There will be no data. How do we know that whether the fault would happen or not? So we need to rethink our strategies for quality and for mapping. Current strategies are good, but it needs to be rethought to make it more efficient. When there's no external data and when there's no valid or an objective intrinsic measures, how can we do that? I propose an idea that I present next slide, is to compare the spatial data in the OpenStreetMap with the context, and to predict the future need of data, not to predict, to guess that future need of spatial data would be required to update with respect to the context. Context, it's quantitative and also qualitative, but mainly qualitative because of need of more detailed. But first, as an engineer, I will start with the quantitative data analysis, and then I will compare it with qualitative data, but keeping both as a mixed design methodology. So this means that first of all, we need to rethink about different spatial data quality measures. For instance, the rate of edit, date of edit is the main concern. What will it give us? Where do our data stand? That's the main question. That at certain moment of time, whether our data is usable for a certain application or not. What purpose can we use it for? And the last question mainly is that, do we always need perfect data? It's more of a concern of a geoethics and critical data studies. Before we go into dive into deep into OSM Utopia, first we need to think how we can define the different dimensions. So I converted the OSM Utopia into different dimensions. But first, I need to think how I can define those dimensions before actually defining it. So I'm using different kinds of questions and different kinds of methodologies that I will discuss in the further slides. First, one of my work has been presented in Phos4G, NL, and also in one of the sessions in my university about open data for resilience, and also I presented a poster about it, about temporal spatial data quality that's currently I'm working on. And this can be, you can always see this on their websites, and this is from the SOTM this year. So how can we develop those understanding about what would be the dimension of utopia that I want to divide into? We first need to ask several questions to get an understanding of how things work and had worked, using existing concepts and theories, also inductively defining how these theories could work for making geodata more available, just and temporarily better. These 5 questions are very basic questions that I'm trying to ask. First is that, can we extract context from a case study that is usable for OpenStreetMap, for guessing, or for knowing whether we have a good quality data at a certain moment of time with respect to temporal quality. Secondly, is can we use the concepts of spatial diffusion to understand the data aggregation patterns? Does the different phenomena of urban processes have any effect on data creation or creating the demand of data? So demand of the data I will discuss in the next slide. What were the key tipping points when the data creation was deemed necessary? Like at what points, what changes that occurred that causes us to think that yes, now we should create data? Why can we shift those tipping point a bit before an humanitarian crisis occurs? Can we do that or not? And fourth is, what is better data? Can we actually delineate better data? Better data is not only availability of the data. Better data is very broad and should be considered as broad, because better data is not like having complete polygons, or maybe it's about more details about what those polygon actually represents. And also, does it make sense to have always the perfect data? For instance, having the data about refugee camps, it's quite a hot topic these days, that whether it's ethically right or whether it's ethically not right, because maybe the government or authoritative regimes maybe are trying to restrict the routes of the refugees. So what is better data? Is it the better data that for available for everyone, or even for the repressive regimes? I don't know. This is a question to ask. Number 5 is, when can we say the data is old? So this is about the temporal quality. How does those dimensions would actually look like? Right? The obvious one are population growth. One of them that's still under definition. This represents how the population growth induces the data need, or how the data is either created due to population growth, or the data gets old or stale due to population growth and it has not been created in OpenStreetMap. In general, if you see the chain of causality here, assume the population is increasing and houses, hospitals, and other amenities are being built for a certain urban life, for existence of a certain urban life. Let's take urban life as an example. While I'm not ignoring rural life, these buildings will create the need of its representation on a map, or create the comparative needs of data following the Bradshaw taxonomy of needs. It still needs that to be tested. It still needs to be tested on real-life applications like in OpenStreetMap. This is one of the upcoming research projects to test and to answer to the questions of relationships between the context and this type of context of population growth and with the data. This is quantitative measure and it needs to be redefined by using case studies and other case studies. So this is one of the definition about can we use the concept of different concepts of urban processes for that. Second is understanding how the data still in OpenStreetMap. This is one of the tipping points that we see. Historical tipping point, what are the contexts and the backends, let's call it. This will give us an understanding of how the data become old. This is to find what causes the data to spike or the data creation move steadily. Then to compare it with certain contexts such as change agent. There is a huge amount of knowledge that I gathered with not huge, knowledge cannot be huge. I mean, like a lot of information is there that is need to be rethink. Knowledge is always less, so we can always gather more knowledge. So it's a bit arrogant to say I gathered a lot of knowledge. No. So to aggregate to see whether these tipping points in Enschede or in Haiti, as an example, we see that there's a spike of data in 2017. That means that the disaster happened and there was no data that was created. What could have been done better to have the data already before the disaster hit in 2017? So what were the tipping points there? That's one of the what could be the tipping points. Next is better data for humanitarian purposes. So I call it a travel back in time to understand what were the needs of the data back then and how the humanitarian projects managed those needs. What were the definitions of their better data and how it was used. So basically this is a travel back in time. So I'll skip it because I'm running out of time. So I use for this analysis, I'm currently using two case studies, two case studies and two different scales. This will help us recognize what type of contingencies hold on more local level and on national levels. South Sudan is a national level and Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh is really local level. So to see whether the comparative and normative data need was different or the same. What we get it from it is what is better data, how it was used, and what are the pros and cons of such data, and can we produce such data with more ethical lens and before the disaster happens, before the humanitarian crisis happens. Of course, the humanitarian contexts are also different, which will widen the understanding of both different cases under humanitarian contexts. So finally, what will we end up with? So conclusion, it will help countries where the data tables are not created by those people that are residing or don't have the resources to contribute. Second is we can have midway when it comes to temporal quality and extrinsic and intrinsic values. Measures, sorry, like we compare it with certain dimensions of utopia, for instance, the idea of synergizing the data need with population growth and or other urban processes such as spatial diffusion, as I mentioned it earlier. More importantly, can we delineate better in data sense and data ethics while contributing to humanitarian projects in OpenStreetMap, and when we can say the data is old? I highly recommend to you to reach out to me, and if you have any ideas that could relate to me, and also LinkedIn and also in Twitter, please reach out. And if you have ideas or ideas of collaboration, please do, because I'm working here alone mostly, and also working some of the do some interviews with people in the humanitarian sector, data using geodata. So I'm looking forward to your questions. I don't think I have much time, but you can always ask questions using these means. Thank you.